Hello everyone, welcome back to newearth.land, where we are creating truth, freedom, abundance, well-being in the world, if that's what we want to do. newearth.land if you want to check out more. But in this video, we're going to be exploring how you can attain a higher level of consciousness, because, well, it is tricky, isn't it? It's tricky out there in the matrix, in the rat race. And, really, as Albert Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So how can we actually attain a high level of consciousness? Well, it starts really in schooling, doesn't it? Like, our education system is more of a training system, and it trains us what to think as opposed to how to think, or generally just to think. And it was Socrates that said that wonder is the beginning of philosophy. And that's really where it all is. It's the curiosity. It's the childlike awe in the face of a profound mystery that surrounds us all. Where do we come from? Who separated our fingers? Who flattened our feet? Who pierced our nostrils, ears and mouth? Statues and portraits don't just happen without painters and sculptors. Has such a sublime work no creator. This is one of the Hermetic poems. But on the topic of poetry, it was William Blake who said, and this really is getting to the crux of how we can actually awaken to a vaster state of consciousness, because it is the imagination that's involved. He said, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Now, these aren't just words, because to the person who's capable more so of philosophical thought or poetic, curiosity, you can begin to feel and meditate and contemplate these words. For example, imagine if you were on a beach and you saw trillions of grains of sand. And now imagine yourself to be this God overlooking all of these worlds, each grain representing a world. And then this is ultimately stretching your mind in space and time. And it's not something, of course, that we were trained at. This is very much alien to us in the West because of our training system, which is very much about convergent thinking. And it was also William Blake who said, the truth could never be told so as to be understood and not be believed. And so what this really means and pertains to is this idea that this isn't something that can be communicated to you just through words. It has to be cultivated from within. It's an internal realization, and it comes by way of visualization mostly. And we never really had any of this sort of time and space at school to explore these things. We only really had art, and art itself, well, it became very much a left brain affair where you're just copying certain things. I remember our homework was just to sort of like draw something you can see. So, even though this can be the beginning, it's definitely not getting to the important part of actually exercising the imagination and making sure that we're directly involved in these mental imaginings. And that's really where we start looking at some of the stuff from Rudolf Steiner and How to Know Higher Worlds. And he's talking about this idea of viewing more so what's around in nature and expanding our horizons, but also imagining ourselves to perhaps be that bird looking back at us. And in this moment, you get this reflection, and you're starting to project your mind in space and time. And the result of that invariably is what we call Kensho or Satori in Zen Buddhism, which is like an instantaneous awakening, very much how they show us, and it's depicted in the film The Matrix, where Morpheus shows Neo some things and then he freaks out. But he also says, this is something you have to experience for yourself for you to actually fully grasp it. And then Rudolf Steiner also goes on to say, what about if we sit down and meditate on perhaps the emergence of a seed, the growth from a seed to a seedling, to a plantling, to a plant, to a tree. And then just shortly after this, we now see it withering away. We see the decay. We see its absorption back into a mineral state. And we might think also of the water cycle, perhaps, and just this evaporation, condensation, and flowing through the streams and back into the sea and back up into the clouds. And in these contemplations, these meditations, we can begin to feel something. And this feeling is the cultivation of these mental faculties that are actually dormant at this time, generally amongst the masses of humanity. And we need to awaken these, and this could only happen through these rather strange exercises, it seems, which we think of as meditation, but really this is something that you can participate in on a daily basis. And perhaps we need to create some sort of alarm on our phone to remind us to actually, take a moment out of the day and think and look up into the night sky, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. All this type of contemplation that we think of as sort of quite childish, perhaps, is absolutely very much rooted in awakening. And it's got nothing to do with this education system that's just about question, answer, question, answer. It's only really about the questioning mind. And there is no necessity to have an answer. It's just keep questioning, be like a child, and just, wonder, like I said earlier, is the beginning of philosophy. And so really, it's what it comes down to is this more divergent way of thinking. And this is where people like Alan Watts was saying, attention is narrowed perception. So we've very much been focused our attention through the education system, and then very much where we're working, it's all just this excessive attention-based system where you're absorbing information and then you're storing it and then you're spitting it out onto a piece of paper and hopefully getting a good grade, and off you go to Oxbridge, off you go to Yale or Harvard. But this is almost opposed, and it's not that isn't an adequate means of sustaining a civilization and of course developing various technologies, but this is not going to actually perform any sort of faculty for growth in the mind. This very much comes from what we might think of as the sacred feminine, the imagination, the intuition, the things that we just almost think of as worthless. Like when we think of people who perhaps are a bit blue sky thinkers, idealists, poets, creatives. This is a sort of mental faculty that's required for us to actually expand our horizons, grow in consciousness, and then actually begin to create the social infrastructure that allows us more freedom to actually think this way, to actually spend a day under a tree just wondering, and perhaps talking to some friends. And this is what it all happens, you see, but it happens infrequently because we're too preoccupied with the matrix, having to pay our way through, make ends meet. And this is why newearth.land exists, because what we need is to actually come together and create that kind of society for ourselves, where we're no longer rent slaves, because at the moment we are, we're paying thousands of pounds per month. And this is doing something incredibly profound and profoundly sort of thwarting, if you like, for the mind, which is keeping it engaged, keeping it active, keeping it attentive and paying attention constantly. It's too much. There's too much focus on the rational mind and being a sharp, witty thinker, and there's not enough malleability in the mind. And this is again about balancing out the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. That's really what we need to do. And we see that through various traditions, and even in the Greek architecture we have the Doric, the Corinthian, and the Ionic column. And in Freemasonry we have Joachim Boaz as the sort of sacred masculine and sacred feminine, which you might think of more scientifically as simply the electron and the proton, radiation, gravitation, the yin, the yang. And so, really, it's about balance, it's about meditation, it's about us coming together to create a society that's more conducive to freedom, so that we can all sit around the table and say, how do we want to progress? What do we want society to become? Because at the moment, I don't see any goals being written down by politicians. It's just the next chapter comes in, then the next chapter, new people, new politicians, new faces, but there's no vision. Like, I'd like to see a piece of paper just with the vision of these politicians written down, because I'm rather confused about how anyone can think that change is going to come about this. But of course, that is how they dupe the next generations. They always give you some sort of hope, and we fall into idolatry, whether it's Donald Trump or, whichever politician, you name it. So we need to realise that we are the people, we are the power, we are the 99%, and we are the ones that need to create the world that we want to visualise. And for me, it comes down to Satchit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, freedom, abundance, and well-being. Surely those have to be the foundations. Let's decommodify shelter, energy, food, and water. Make those things a guaranteed foundation for all. Surely if that's not the direction, then where are we heading? So if that sounds interesting to you, do check out newearth.land, and I shall see you in the next video.